who am I, first of all? Why am I here? Why are you listening to me? I'm James Smith. I am the head of engineering at Apolitical, which means I lead the team that builds our platform. Previously, I was the head of labs at the Open Data Institute here in London. And I've been a software engineer and technologist for 20 years. I'm passionate about technology and what it can do. I believe that technology can make the world a better place, but I also try to remain very pragmatic about it and make sure that we're solving the right problems. I'm passionate about open source, about open collaboration and the power of the web and other new technologies to connect us all. So new technology is, I mean, there's always more new technology. We're continually bombarded with new technologies, new products, things like that. And the promise of these is always very similar, that if vague, that they will make things cheaper, that they'll make them safer, faster, and generally better. But that's very vague. And there's what I want to do today is to just talk through, I suppose, my approach and my thinking around new technologies as a way of helping you to develop technical intuition, perhaps, around what new technologies are going to be, around how to look at them, how to work out what they're going to be good for. So there's always new technology, always, and it follows the way we think about technology follows a reasonably predictable pattern, which is a pattern identified by Gartner that they call the hype cycle. And they publish yearly updates on where particular technologies are on this cycle and things like that. But there's a common theme. So you start out with a technology trigger, that is the creation of a new piece of technology or a new idea. And rapidly the excitement around that goes up very, very quickly. You know, it's the newest, shiniest thing, and it can solve all our problems is very common. And after a certain amount of time, you arrive at this peak, which they call the peak of inflated expectations, where everyone is thus far thinking that this can solve everything. Inevitably then, as the understanding of the technology gets more mature, you realize that it can't solve everything. So there's kind of a backlash, and you end up in this thing that they call the trough of disillusionment, which I like. I love the wording that they've put on this, where it's sort of a backlash against that hype. But the important part of this is that the hype is not, you know, it's not unjustified, right? There are new technologies allow you to do new things, and that's great. But what you have to do is get through into maturity. So after this this sort of peak and trough, then you end up on a sort of a more predictable path to maturity, where we as an industry and as a community work out what these technologies are really good for. You know, what use cases they do work for, what they don't work for, when should we use them? And you end up in this going up this slope of enlightenment towards what they call the plateau of productivity, where it is boring now, where the technology is boring. It's every day doing its job as part of the new way we do things. And the thing with any new technology is it's not to avoid that peak, because it inevitably happens. You inevitably get the peak and the trough, but to smooth out that as much as possible, and to get through to the productivity side as quickly as you can. So whenever I look at technologies, it's about trying to work out how we get to the real applications as quickly as possible. And you see this with all technologies. It's not just the super new exciting ones we're looking at now. You know, the industry buzzwords and things have been around forever. basically, as long as there's been technology. I'm sure this was the case for I don't know, printing and things like that, I expect. There's probably no hard data there. So looking at, this is actually the most recent. This is their hype cycle report for 2018. And you can see kind of where a number of technologies are on this. So they don't do so much about the productivity ones because they're kind of, you know, getting out of that cycle now. But you can see things like blockchain, for instance, which is a huge one, has been really accelerating up that peak for a long time, but is now starting to drop down towards the trough, and is progressing through to that point where it becomes stable and useful and predictable and boring. So there's that. You can see things like deep learning, for instance, is extremely high right now on that curve, and will follow the same sort of path. And then there's a whole bunch of things sort of right down near the innovation trigger end that, you know, I couldn't tell you what smart dust is, but I'm sure we'll all be hearing about it in a while as it accelerates up that path. So again, the trick is not sort of to ignore the hype or to or anything else, but to get through to the other side. And many technologies will move along this at different rates. They get stuck at one point. Some never make it out of the trough because there aren't the right applications for them, for whatever. So it's important to be aware of this as a common pattern, really. So when looking at new technology, it's important to kind of get past that hype and ask the real questions. And the real questions that I try and ask are, in simple terms, what does it do? First of all, not, you know, what am I being told it will solve in the future, but what does it actually do? What is it? And how does it do that differently to what's already out there? We have a huge array of technology already, and the newest thing may be it may be all over the news and all over the various bits of reporting, but what it does differently might not be a thing that we actually need. So we can rely on more stable, more mature solutions, and that's okay. So, you know, asking if we need those things is really important, and coming up with a sort of a healthy cynicism, not a writing off of all new technology, because as I said, you know, I'm a huge believer in technology, but looking at it with a kind of with a healthy cynicism approach, and of course bewaring PR, being wary of PR is really important as well, because obviously in the technology space there's a huge amount of investment, a huge number of new startups always trying to push whatever they are working on, and they live and die on building up those expectations. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to use those and build something more stable off them, you need to see through that PR. So looking at those, trying to answer those questions is really important. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about blockchains, because they are a product that has, or technology rather, that's been going through this cycle recently over the last few years, and has probably been one of the highest peaks of inflated expectations, perhaps for a long time in my career, certainly, and it kept on going for a long time as well. So it's really it's a really interesting one to look at, and so yeah, so let's ask ourselves those questions. First of all, what does it do? So, you know, we hear a lot about them and about how they will change everything, and actually they fundamentally rewire all of the way everything works. But what does it do, really? What's it for? And when you get down to it, the core There are many variants, and many of you here will know other things that sort of go on top of this. But at the core of what blockchains are for is they're information stores. They store information, much like many other technologies we already know. You can think of them as a kind of a database, really. And so, you know, stripping away all of everything else, they're in that class of technologies. So then we need to look at what does it do differently to existing solutions, the databases that we have that are mature, that we can work with. And in this case, that distinctive part is the decentralization aspect of a blockchain. It is a kind of database that, rather than being in one place on one server governed by one central authority, works in a very different way to store its data. It works in a way that is widely distributed across the internet. So, you know, there are copies of the database all around the world, run by many different people. It allows many people to write to it at once, without having to have permission to do so. So it's a way that a huge number of people can store information together, and it doesn't have any central authority. So there is no need for a central authority to be issuing credentials to access, or to be trusted with the maintenance of that system. And one other very important technical property of these things is that they're immutable. So that means that the information that is in them can't change. So you can add more information, and you can say that the new information you've added should be used instead of older information, but the old information cannot be removed. So you have a full history of everything that has ever been done on that in that data store. And these are the sort of the main features, I suppose, of these sort of systems that are different to the existing databases we have. So it's really important to ask for each of those things: do we need that thing? Do we need to have a system that is widely distributed? If not, we have normal databases that will work just as well, that will provide the other features potentially. Do you need many people to write to it? If not, actually all you're doing is pushing out a set of data, and you can publish that data in a widely distributed way on the web using simpler technologies that we understand better, that are more predictable and more less risky. The no central authority one is a really big one, especially around discussions of blockchain in the policy arena. If a trusted party is available and is trusted, then you can use systems that we already have to do this. And in the case where a government is saying, let's use a blockchain to do this thing that we already do, you have a central authority. Now, that's not the case in everywhere around the world. It's not the case in all governments, and there are strong arguments for using this stuff in particularly environments where corruption is more prevalent. But that's a really important one. And the other one is this immutability, which actually sort of cuts both ways. It can be a very good thing, but it can be a very bad thing. So if data ever needs to be rewritten, this won't work, because all of that history of data is still there. As I said, you can write something to it that says that previous information is out of date, but you can't remove the previous information, with certain caveats. There are systems that are looking at it and so on, but in general. Which means that often there is the idea of truth is, there are many different kinds of truth, and official truth can be quite different from, I want to say actual truth, but the record of events that really happened, the official truth may be different. And there are many good reasons for that, as well as a number of bad reasons, and it's about balancing which of those is more important in your case. And it's really important to see through the PR. So a few years ago, one of the earliest examples of blockchains being used in, particularly the Bitcoin blockchain in this case, being used in the public sector, in government, was this idea that Honduras were going to run it, use it to run their land registry to avoid to reduce corruption and a number of other things. This was a brilliant piece of it was a really interesting idea. It was a brilliant piece of PR for the company that were involved in doing it, but it never actually came to anything. But it was cited time and time again in the reasons why we must be looking at this thing. You know, it's being used over here. It's not necessarily always actually the truth. It's a very good vehicle for companies to raise investment and things like that, but it's you have to kind of see through some of that sometimes, or at least be wary of that. And so whenever you're looking at technologies, it's very easy to go, what can we do with this technology? But it's really, really important to remain focused on the problem that you are working on, that you're trying to deal with, not on the technology. As an engineer, there are new technologies coming along all the time that I get, you know, I would love to go and spend time on learning about, getting into, but I have a set of things that I have a set of problems that I'm trying to resolve, and it's a matter of looking at those first rather than the technology. So rather than asking, how can we use new technology X, we have to remember to ask ourselves, what technology is out there when we're at the right point to ask that question? What technology is out there that could help us solve this problem? Rather than looking for a place to fit a technology, remember to focus on the problem and look for technologies that can help. And this is about focusing on user needs, whether your users are citizens or people within government or whatever, but focusing on what those needs are and what the problems are, and avoiding focusing on what the users say they want as well, and you know, other stakeholders. It can be, you know, we want to be innovative is a huge thing, and okay, but what do we actually need to? What do we need to do? What are we trying to solve? And you know, a huge red flag for me is if it can't be explained without using jargon, without if it can't be explained simply, then you know, be very wary. If somebody can't help you to understand those fundamental questions of what is it, how is it different, and do we need that, then you have to be very wary. I did a talk a while back in an event. There were a number of people talking about different. This was on blockchains as well. A number of people talking about different applications of the technology, and the first speaker was talking, and about 10 minutes in, somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, "Could you just explain what a blockchain is?" And he had to then ask around the room for somebody who could do that, because he wasn't focused on trying to help people understand the thing. It was much more about, here's a shiny thing that we're trying to do something with. So the ability to explain and understand it's really important. And the corollary for that is, if you can't get to the point where you can explain it, then you're not really ready yet to take the decision on whether it's the right thing. So yeah, I think that's a very important thing. It's really important to beware of magic words around this stuff as well. And one that's particularly powerful is innovation. We all want to seem innovative. We all want to be innovation is important and will move us to the future, and that's true. But sometimes these words can hide a lot of, they can be a bit dazzling sometimes, and it's very important to try and avoid that. I love this picture, particularly because it looks like he's actually about to turn the innovation off, which is kind of weird. But it's, yeah, you just have to be careful of those kinds of things. And then when you're looking at, when you say, okay, this technology could help us solve this problem, then how do we actually put it into action? And I think this is something that we'll probably talk about more in the discussion, and will come up, is how do we do that? But as always with new technologies, you will find new problems. You know, nothing will solve all of the problems, and even if it solves all the problems you know about, it will come with its own set. So it's important to work in an agile kind of way, which is really about starting small, starting with the minimum thing you can do to learn what you need to learn, and then to keep changing and improving and what we call iterating. So you might start with a very small demonstration of a technology for a particular problem, measure what works, find out what doesn't work, and change fast. And there is an idea in engineering that we and in technology development we talk about as a minimum viable product, which is about really building the smallest thing, making the smallest thing you can to prove the point. And one really important way to look at that is actually aiming to prove yourself wrong. You're not looking to, if you're properly critically assessing technology, you're not looking to prove that you are correct. You're looking to prove yourself wrong, because it's really hard to do. It's very hard to do, to try and prove why you have made the wrong choice. But if you can't prove that you've made the wrong choice, then you're better off. Whereas if you'll learn better by trying to prove your assumptions wrong. So with that, I think that's kind of a framing for the discussion. That's kind of the way I look at assessing technology from my point of view and my experience. Other people will have many different approaches. I'm looking over at Sean to see if there are where we want to go in terms of questions and things from here. I'll just stop the screen share and go back to video. There we are.
So now it's time for the question and answer idea sharing part of our conversation. And as we go along, please share any questions in the chat or unmute yourself so that kind of we can hear from you, your experiences and your questions. I'm going to start by recognizing Jeremy. I've just unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Hi there. Yep. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Hi, Jeremy.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges I've faced recently with trying to keep pace with new technology and the way that it's constantly being developed, yet working in government is trying to change the processes of way people have always done things, and that just doesn't change at the same rate as the technology changes. Absolutely. So any suggestions or thoughts on how that could be tackled as sort of new technologies constantly coming in would be really useful from my perspective.
And Jeremy, before we dive in, can you just share a little bit about you and your background?
Okay, I currently work for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in the UK, supporting the IT systems and services. I've got 2 operational bridges, so we're monitoring services across HMRC, critical services and infrastructure for issues either impacting the in-house users or the external customers. So we're constantly having to work with different areas who are using their own technologies and tool sets to enhance their services, and trying to introduce different technologies into their roadmaps, you know, at short notice is extremely difficult, because they've, in a sense, there is so much technology, and people have different sort of perspectives on that technology and benefits and disadvantages. So it's really hard to try and keep at the same pace as what the private sector wants you to operate at, in terms of the constant updates, changes, bug fixes, you know, all of those things. And it's very hard to keep running at the same pace they want you to.
Yeah.
It's almost sometimes too fast, and then almost needs to be a way to slow them down.
It's too fast for me.
Yeah.
So I think I expect there'll be some ideas in the chat from other people's experiences on that as well. So I'll get Sean to keep an eye on that while I sort of respond. But I mean, there's a number of things there, I guess. So first, that question of should you be keeping up with that pace? In a way, it's sort of that kind of push towards sort of innovation and keeping up and whatever. But is it solving the right problem? And so on is very difficult. But so that, I mean, that's always going to be a tension. But in terms of how to get people bought in and to change these things in institutions, often when you're looking at introducing new technologies, particularly at an institutional level, it's really often a cultural change. So I'm definitely a technologist, but I'm certainly a kind of technologist that will tell you that what you have is not a technology problem. What you have is a culture or a people problem. Often not a people problem, but you know what I mean. Because normally it is that the technology will do what it does, but people are harder to change. What I find in from my sort of engineering experience, which is not in government or anything like that, so it's only going to be so applicable, is that trying to get stakeholders to adopt changes and things like that and not stick to the old way of doing it, is that people tend to be quite good at adopting things if it makes their lives easier and makes their jobs easier and makes them look good. So in a way, it can be a bit of a cynical approach to things again, but it's sort of if you're trying to get a new system adopted, but actually it's making people's lives more difficult, even in the short term, they will switch off and they'll back away from it and be very resistant. So those kinds of, that sort of small scale, agile development and working out at each point, getting lots and lots of feedback on what the problems are. Is this good enough yet? That sort of thing, I think, is essential, really, and then widening that pool of stakeholders as you get bigger to learn from people.
Okay, thank you.
If that makes sense.
Thanks, Jeremy. Cedric, I've just unmuted you. Would you be able to share a little bit about you, where you're calling from, and then your question?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Cedric Jean-Marie. I work for the Canadian federal government at a department called Canadian Heritage. Currently working in the space of innovation. I am one of lucky 19 individuals in the public service of Canada that's working across mandates. So we are a group of individuals that work under a task force at the deputy minister level, working on projects that kind of cross the individual silos or the verticals of government. And one interesting, I guess, observation that's kind of appeared over time in this space is that fundamentally technology often transforms how you would deal with a problem. And this is particularly relevant when you're looking at government and trying to be a digital government that has grown from a paper-based system. You see a lot of people kind of trying to transplant physical processes into the digital realm when the digital capabilities fundamentally transforms the way you would actually deliver certain services. And so I guess my question is, like, when you're considering technology to address a certain problem, it's really important to actually know how the technologies work to start to explore how you would address the problem. And so I feel like if some of the advice you're giving is like, just focus on the problem, I think it's really important to actually have that other side of the equation, is what does the technology do to kind of address that problem. Anyways, that's kind of where I'm from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree. There are technology can sometimes introduce new areas and things you didn't know to ask, and that is absolutely true. So, getting an understanding of what those really are, of what the technologies really are, is very important. But I think I hope that the advice around sort of asking what this is and how is it different helps highlight what those different possibilities are, hopefully. And then, given that understanding, then you can sort of make the choice of, okay, which ones are appropriate to use in this situation while remaining focused on the problem. So you do need a balance of both. I absolutely agree. And there's a place within organizations for groups like yours who are trying to understand the possibilities of this stuff, and then helping people to work out what how they can use them to help solve their problems, but that came out slightly wrong, where they are on the menu of things they can use to help solve the problem that they're focused on. So it's a combination, I think. Sure.
And thank you. Perhaps next I'll recognize Steve. Let me make sure that you're unmuted. Steve, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. All right. Okay. Hey, thank you for the interesting presentation and your thoughts of wisdom, as we may call them, the do's and don'ts. As Sean will probably also ask me to introduce a little bit myself, I will do it immediately, not after having asked the question. Myself, I'm actually working here in Luxembourg in a new ministry which has been created just recently, the Ministry of Digitalization. And there's also what we call the administrative reform or simplification. It's the part where I'm working on and have been working on for a little bit less than 1 year. And one of the issues I'm noticing very often is, okay, you have the technology and the IT department is taking, luckily, a very careful approach. So they're a little bit reticent to new technology. And therefore, there's a little bit of twofold question. On the one hand is regarding blockchain, for example, especially nowadays, as we will exchange more and more data and information between administrations and between external parties, this means citizens. Blockchain is quite interesting in order, as you also mentioned, to have a track about the information, and especially with GDPR, it will enable a more control and also more tracking part. That's one thing. Is, do you have by chance any examples where some governments have applied blockchain technology or are investigating to apply it, even if it's in a small scale? And the other part is a little bit to overcome the reticence, first because there's no regulatory environment yet, and also from the IT side, because they have to make sure that everything works fine and so on. How about building sandbox environments? I don't. Do you have any hints or thoughts on that one? So it's a twofold. On one hand, eventually examples or hints on actual use or projected use of the blockchain technology in governmental services. And the other would be eventually the use of a sandbox environment or something the like. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, to take the first part of that, you mentioned looking at the use of blockchains as this way of tracking access to data, and I think that's one of the most probably one of the most mature uses of this that I've seen so far, because it's actually using it for the right reasons, making sure that there is trust in the data, that it can't be modified without others knowing, that it is immutable. You know, you don't want to be able to go back and erase logs of access. And I think that's definitely a very promising one. I believe, I'm not an absolute expert on this, but I think this is how Estonia do their log their access to citizen records. I think is stored in a blockchain system. That's been a little while since I've looked at it, but I'm fairly sure that's in use there. I think certainly the stuff that is going on, Estonia are generally leaders in that space, and the solutions they come up with tend to be fairly mature and fairly sensible. So that's certainly a good place to look, and I think they're doing something like that. So that's worth looking into. I hope that I don't know. Can you do some quick googling to see if we have an article on that? I think we might do.
Yeah, I think we will, and what we'll do is we'll kind of put together all of our best resources and send it around afterwards.
That's a great idea.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah. The second part, the sandbox question. I think that's so. Just for anybody who's unfamiliar with the metaphor, the sandbox idea is a place in which an environment in which you can try out technology and things without affecting anything outside that, particularly, especially in terms of security and things like that. And I think that goes along with this sort of agile experimentation. If you can work in start in a small scale, you're not operating something at a level where it has to be, completely robust to all possible circumstances and run for everyone in the entire country. You can work out some aspects of that at the smaller scale, sort of inherently in that kind of sandbox environment. Actually, I'm just going to pick up on something Jerry's written here, who has a couple more examples of blockchains. Georgia apparently has been putting part of their land registry on the blockchain, and he's been told it actually works, which I don't know about, but I know the land registries are one that a number of countries have looked at. I think a lot of them inspired by the Honduras example, but yeah, hopefully some of them have actually turned into reality. Tracking of skills passports as well for young people and qualifications is another one that I know is being investigated in a number of places. But I don't think there are many places that have this stuff fully in production yet, as we would say, with across all citizens. If anywhere, it'll be somewhere like Estonia that's doing that.
And now I'm going to quickly recognize Jerry. You're unmuted. Can you hear us? You just shared a few good examples, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm Jerry. You can hear me, I presume. Thumbs up.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I'm a freelance, call it a consultant, the ugly C word, but I have a passion for governmental and non-profit stuff. I've been working around blockchain for a few years, and there are quite a few cases that are, as you say, are in experimental mode, proof of concept mode, concept mode even. But governments are quite actively exploring what this technology can do for them, what problem it can fix for them. So I'm from Belgium. So I know a few cases from the Flemish government where they actually have a decent budget to find use cases. Myself, I helped the agent, or what do you call it, the education agency, to figure out, can this technology do something for us? And we came up with a very simple case about trying to blockchainify, if that's a word, or we use blockchain in a way to create more trust between teachers and the schools they work for in the way they sign their contracts, because there's huge room for error there, and it creates an enormous type of mistrust or distrust. That was on a concept level, but they're now trying to find funding to bring that into a more technological level and actually try and build that to see whether it's working. Because, yeah, as you say, concepts are easy. Execution is another level. I know the Dutch government has also identified about 50 use cases where they're looking at how to optimize some of their subsidy streams or identity issues. I know the Swiss city of Zug is one of the ones that experimenting with putting your identity as a person on a blockchain. So once it's been validated by a trusted party, in this case, like a government official, it can be validated across a range of other parties. And again, I'm very happy that you mentioned be wary of PR stories. But I've been told that Zug one is also actually working in some capacity, not maybe at scale, but definitely in some shape or form.
Great. I think definitely as any technology goes through that process and is getting now, you know, if in the case of blockchain, if that analysis of Gartner's is correct, is heading into that disillusionment, it's now really important to pull out those things that are working so that we can work out what those use cases are that do work and are helpful to get through to the productive aspect. Yeah. So yeah, it's essential to do that. It's very interesting you mentioned identity as one. Identity is if we can work out how to do identity in a privacy-friendly yet useful way, it will unlock a lot of things, I think. So there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff there. One of the aspects there with is the immutability of things, because identities can change, and there are certainly here in the UK, as I suspect in other countries, if, for instance, you have the right to have your gender changed. Obviously, you can change your gender. You have the right to have that reflected in official documentation, as if you were never the other gender. So it's not a matter of writing in something to say this has changed. It's a matter of actually rewriting official truth. And that's going to be an interesting one for this set of technologies. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how they cope with that.
Thanks, Jerry. That might be a good segue into our next question, and from Fang in Taiwan. Fang, I'm going to try to unmute you. Are you able to share your question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm interested in exploring more on how blockchain or other possible technologies can really facilitate the imagination of next generation of governance. I know this is a really big question because in my practice, I'm a consultant in the Taiwanese central government that facilitate policy and service improvement. And I'm from the public digital innovation space, sit in the cabinet office. We often have to facilitate the conversation between wider citizens and also the government. And often people find it difficult to reach a consensus or find a way to actually benefit all different stakeholders. And even we believe that our organization would like to facilitate and make sure that the citizens and the government are all equal, but the governance dynamic in the government and our current society is people are expecting top-down intervention, so that we got legitimacy, and there will be people doing something. Like citizens are tend not to have that legitimacy, or they don't feel that they are powerful enough to facilitate any change. And I think that is very unhealthy in our society, because we are always, not always, sometimes expecting heroes or the government to do something for the citizens, to govern people. And so I'm trying to see how can we facilitate the conversation in our country, in our society, to really think that every citizen, including like civil servants, they are also citizens. How can we actually make sure everyone are equal and can use their power to actually facilitate change, to think a future that is actually beneficial for everyone? So that's why I started to look into blockchain and the way it curates the interaction and relationship between different nodes, and think how that kind of concept can be applied into the future of governance. And I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts or any experiment on this.
That's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions. It's a huge area of interest for me, of how technology generally, and from my point of view, particularly the network that we now have, the network age we live in, helps us change the way we do collective action, and government being a collective action problem. It's not quite what I want to say. It's the way we do things as a group. I find that a very difficult one to answer apolitically, if you like, because I think a lot of that does come down to politics, and actually how should society be organized. And so what can seem on the top level a reasonably simple question rapidly gets into the huge questions about actually who are we as a society, what are we, how do we work together, how do we want to organize ourselves, and that's, yeah, it's something I can think about for hours and hours on end. Jerry actually has done me another favor there and put in some really useful links to a couple of organizations and projects that are working on governance using blockchains and things like that. As you said, very ambitious, worth a look. There are plenty of people experimenting with blockchain around different aspects of democracy around the world. Plenty of people looking at blockchain voting, things like that. For me, one of the big issues there is around identity. Actually coming back to what I was talking about earlier, if we can, a lot of them are predicated on being able to identify who is doing what, but how do you do that in a way that makes sure we preserve things like secret ballots and so on. But even talking about things like that, these are inherently political questions of how do we run our societies. So yeah, it's one of those things that there's a lot of stuff out there, and I think we're all exploring it together. There are certainly no answers yet, I don't think, but it's fascinating.
Thanks, Fang. And we have time for just a few more questions. One that we have is from Anu, who's a health policy analyst and a department that's responsible for regulating many aspects of health. Anu's area of focus is emerging and advanced technologies that are or will be used in health products and foods, creating an agile framework for things that fall in a federal jurisdiction. But creating an agile framework for things that fall in a federal jurisdiction is a challenge. And so Anu's question is, what are some guiding principles for agile experimentation for government that regulate areas where there's little room for error, such as health?
That's a really good question. Health is one of those, education is another. Health in the sense that obviously you can do harm if you get it wrong. Education is very slow. It takes a long time to see results and things like that. So these are areas where it's very difficult to do agile experiments. In health, I think we have a really good model that already exists to follow around clinical trials. So when we test new medicines, we do very careful, I say we, nothing to do with me, but we do very careful experimental design, rolling out with different levels of experimentation, first on animals or cell cultures, then through to a small number of volunteers, through to larger trials, and so on and so on. And that's very well established, and it has a huge amount of ethical design built in, and things like that around how we do those. There are certainly things to improve about clinical trials. So the publishing of negative results, for instance, is an area that massively needs improving, and actually has quite an interesting application for blockchain technology. Bring that back around. But I think combining in areas where there are already things that we know about, so we work with this stuff, particularly in health. We can learn a lot from that, combine it with the agile approach. It has a lot in common of start small, learn quickly, prove yourself wrong. There's a lot of that stuff is common. So I think there's a good model there, which probably we could learn from across the board.
Thank you, Anu. And now I'm going to recognize Jason. Can you hear us? I just unmuted.
Yeah,
Perfect.
You can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jason.
Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah, so my name is Jason. I work for the Ontario government in the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. I work in the Advanced Technologies Unit, and my role in there is to sort of scale on new technologies that are supposedly 10 years away is sort of the range that we try to work with. So we're a dedicated unit on that. And I was just wondering if you've come into sort of any use cases or experiences with technology scouting within the public sector, just because it's an activity and a function that's usually seen in the public sector, but very focused on sort of acquisitions and the research for that firm. And so it's sort of derived from the strategic outcomes. But with obviously government, you don't really have the same value loop that you could generate in a private company, in terms of both in terms of research and in terms of sort of just like just value really in terms of funding. And then also with a lot of government bodies, the strategic outcomes are not really long-term just because of the way election cycles work and stuff like that. Yeah. So when you're thinking about these really long-term technologies, there isn't a lot of room to sort of plan out, 10 years down the line. So I was wondering if you came into any contact with examples of how, this function can be applied in sort of the public sector.
That's a fascinating one. No.
That's okay.
I'm sure there are. I can't really speak to that usefully.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Or experiences? Feel free to either just unmute yourself and share aloud or post in the chat.
I should say that we are a relatively new unit. So, this isn't, we're not exactly taking from someone. Exactly.
I think you should write an op-ed for Apolitical with your experiences.
Okay.
and help us all to learn about how that works. Like you say, it's an essential function. It's something that any private company in this area is going to be looking ahead, doing when you're talking about acquisitions and things, doing due diligence on working out what's coming. And I think it's absolutely right. It's essential. I think, as we touched on earlier, you have to have that sort of eye on the future. But as you say, election cycles and things. Yeah, all I'm doing is sympathizing and agreeing there. But it's
yeah, no, it's all good. I'm just kind of curious as to maybe it's not the question shouldn't be posed directly towards technology scouting, but more on like sort of a broad sense in terms of other methods to sort of scout long-term technologies, just because the way governments operate, it's, policymakers are very sort of, I guess generally reactive in nature, and also, just the job function is more short-term looking because of the sort of the lack of competition in the private sector. So I'm just curious as to how sort of identifying these new technologies work in a more, in a different environment such as government.
Yeah. I think that's definitely one to throw to the community here who may have other experiences, but the way that the thing that I would say is that you have to be looking at it, and it sounds like you're in the right kind of place to be doing that. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Actually, yes, Jerry's doing half my job here. It's great. He's pointing out things like innovation funds, like the European Horizon 2020 funds, often have cities and startups and people like that working together on these projects. But yeah, innovation funds, innovation agencies, but then those can often be based around what is currently the hype cycle. So, at the moment, it is still, there are innovation agencies around who are very much more interested in your thing if you can get the word blockchain into it, or machine learning, or things like that, rather than the stuff that is 10 years down the line. So that's a very, I think that's probably quite a different area, but yeah, interesting.
For sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I think with that, and we're hitting the hour here, and so I guess I'll just close out with James perhaps answering any or sharing any final thoughts to send us off.
Final thoughts. Summarize the whole thing in one sentence. Technology can be amazing, and it's definitely a good thing, but we just have to be careful about how we think about it and not be blinded by the shiny things. That's a terrible final thought. I can do better, but we'll send it around later.
We will, and so part of this is the point of these is to kind of help you explore a new topic together, and then the other part is to let you see behind the veil of Apolitical and actually meet some of the people who make it possible. And James is, without James, we would not have Apolitical. I think that's fair to say. So we really appreciate you joining us today, and hope you have great ends and beginnings to the day.
Great to meet you all. Thanks for your questions.